Nobody suspected the elderly gentleman shuffling through their sleepy town carried secrets that could shake governments. When the store clerk pointed an accusatory finger and the patrolman clicked metal restraints around weathered wrists, not a soul questioned the arrest. Not a soul wondered. Not a soul investigated further. Until half an hour passed and a convoy of midnight black vehicles thundered into the precinct. Until federal operatives in obsidian suits rendered crisp salutes to the man they'd confined behind bars. Until the local law enforcement finally understood they hadn't simply detained a defenseless senior citizen. They had shackled a ghost from classified operations and destroyed decades of invisible heroism. This tale transcends a simple case of mistaken identity. It explores what society surrenders when we cease paying attention and what treasures emerge when we finally choose to see clearly. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where narratives of humanity and generosity unfold. Let's discover the truth behind these events. The evening light descended peacefully across Millstone, Virginia, wrapping the modest community in warm, drowsy illumination. This was the sort of place where neighbors knew each other's business, where the year's most shocking incident might involve Mrs. Henderson's tabby disappearing overnight. Drama never visited here. Drama was never invited here. Patrolman Kyle Morgan nursed tepid coffee from a cracked flask while stationed in his patrol car along Central Avenue. 3 months into his beat, he still felt as though he wore borrowed uniforms. His field training supervisor, Sergeant Tom Reeves, occupied the passenger seat, aviator glasses balanced on his bridge, silently critiquing humanity one glare at a time. "Quiet afternoon," Kyle ventured, attempting conversation. "Perfect. Just how we prefer it," Reeves responded without glancing over. Static whispered through the radio. Kyle observed small-town existence drifting past. A youngster pedaling his bicycle, elderly spouses walking hand in hand, adolescents gathering near the cafe. Serene, routine, yet tranquility remains delicate. A single pebble can demolish perfect stillness. Within Peterson's Market, an aging gentleman navigated slowly through the preserved food section. Samuel Whitaker was his name. To townspeople, he registered as barely more than a specter, someone residing quietly in a deteriorating cottage beyond municipal limits. Local gossip suggested military background, though nobody possessed real knowledge. Sam rarely spoke. He touched his cap brim, settled his purchases, and minded his own affairs. On this particular day, Sam selected fresh bread, dairy, and tinned stew. His movements carried particular precision, as if each gesture had been instructed, rehearsed, mastered. As Sam approached the checkout counter, a youth ahead dropped his billfold. It struck the tiles soundlessly. The young man remained oblivious, already halfway through the exit. Sam stooped deliberately, retrieved the wallet with care, and pivoted to speak. "Young man," before completion, the cashier, a recent hire named Cindy, witnessed only her worst fears. "Stop right there," she snapped. "Release that immediately." Sam appeared puzzled. "I simply intended to," but Cindy had already summoned store manager Hal Briggs, who promptly contacted police headquarters. When dispatch crackled through Kyle's radio, the phrase "potential larceny in progress" jolted both officers alert. "Time to move," Reeves announced, already activating emergency lights. They arrived within moments. Peterson's Market stood eerily still, the entrance chime tinkling as Kyle and Reeves entered. Manager Briggs immediately identified Sam. "That individual there," Briggs declared nervously, "attempted stealing that wallet." Sam remained beside the register, the billfold held awkwardly, as if uncertain how to proceed. His expression stayed composed, almost weary. Kyle paused. Something felt fundamentally wrong about this situation, yet Reeves was already advancing. "Sir, face away. Place your hands behind you," Reeves commanded. "This is all a misunderstanding," Sam replied softly, his voice gravelly and low. "Turn around immediately." Sam cooperated without struggle. Kyle retrieved handcuffs from his belt with growing unease. At headquarters, they processed him like any standard suspect. Reeves tossed Sam's faded military jacket onto a bench and secured him in the detention cell. Kyle remained near the glass partition, observing the elderly man sit quietly on the metal bench within. No hostility, no terror, just profound, unshakable serenity. You realize, Reeves remarked smugly, wallet theft constitutes a felony. Sam offered no response. Kyle exhaled heavily and stepped away. He reached for the jacket, intending to properly inventory Sam's possessions. His fingers encountered something concealed in an inner compartment. Inside, he discovered credentials. Not standard police identification, not typical military documentation. This differed entirely. Substantial, solid, engraved with an eagle emblem and the inscription, United States Special Forces, Alpha Level Clearance. Kyle's pulse accelerated. "Sergeant," he called. Reeves wandered over, examining the badge. "What in blazes is that?" he muttered. They searched Sam's wallet next. No plastic cards. Only an unusual military identification older than anything Kyle had encountered. "Better report this," Reeves said suddenly, his tone serious. Kyle swallowed nervously and dialed the number printed on the identification's reverse. The connection clicked once, then a voice answered. "Agent Daniel Cross, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Kyle stammered. "This is Officer Kyle Morgan, Millstone Police Department. We have Samuel Whitaker in custody, arrested for suspected theft." Silence. Then the voice returned, sharp and urgent. "Repeat that name." "Samuel Whitaker." Another pause, longer this time. "Secure your facility. Do not interrogate him. Do not engage him. We're dispatching personnel immediately. 30 minutes. The line disconnected before Kyle could respond. He turned toward Reeves, face ashen. "Who exactly did we just apprehend?" he whispered. Reeves had no answer, only the grim tightening around his eyes. Inside the cell, Sam lifted his head and regarded them through the barrier. "You gentlemen might consider brewing fresh coffee," he said calmly. "Appears we're in for an extended evening." Kyle felt chills race down his spine. Outside, sunshine continued blessing the peaceful little community. Inside, a tempest was building, silent and invisible. The atmosphere within Millstone Police Headquarters grew increasingly oppressive with each passing moment. Officer Kyle Morgan paced near the front counter, unable to remain seated. Sergeant Tom Reeves stood against the wall, arms folded tightly across his torso. Both men continuously checked the clock. 30 minutes, the agent had specified. 25 minutes remaining. Kyle found himself stealing glances at the holding area. Samuel Whitaker, no longer simply Sam, but someone whose identity prompted immediate FBI mobilization, sat motionless on the bench. His hands rested peacefully on his knees, his demeanor inscrutable, almost as though he anticipated something he'd foreseen all along. "Think he's dangerous," Kyle whispered. Reeves shook his head slowly. "Not dangerous, necessarily." Before Kyle could inquire further, the deep rumble of engines resonated from outside. He rushed to the window. 4 Obsidian SUVs glided into the parking area with military precision. The sight made Kyle's stomach lurch. This wasn't some regional office response. This was federal, high priority, and deadly serious. The lead vehicle's door opened, and a tall figure in an immaculate dark suit emerged. His movements were crisp, intentional. Others followed, agents spreading out, establishing perimeter security as though expecting armed resistance. Kyle opened the station entrance, his hand trembling slightly. The lead agent approached, displaying credentials so rapidly they blurred. "Special Agent Matthew Cross, FBI. "Where is Mr. Whitaker?" Kyle stammered, gesturing toward the detention area. Without hesitation, Cross and 2 agents strode past, unlocking the cell with swift, practiced motions. Sam rose even before they completely opened the door. He nodded courteously to the agents as if greeting familiar colleagues. "Mr. Whitaker, apologies for this inconvenience," Agent Cross said with unmistakable deference. "No difficulties whatsoever, son," Sam replied steadily. The agents escorted Sam out without acknowledging Kyle or Reeves. Only after their departure did another agent, a woman with penetrating eyes and quiet command, approach the officers. "Do you comprehend who you detained today?" she asked. Kyle shook his head. She sighed deeply. Samuel Whitaker served in 5 classified combat zones. He's legendary in certain communities. Counterterrorism, covert operations. His record is so classified that even I've accessed only fragments. Reeves cleared his throat roughly. Why would someone of his caliber live in a shack outside Millstone? The agent smiled sadly. Some heroes choose silence over medals. Without further words, she departed, vanishing into one of the black vehicles. Kyle stood frozen long after the cars disappeared down the road. He replayed every moment, the restraints, how Reeves had shoved Sam into the cruiser, the quiet dignity Sam never abandoned. We treated him like a common criminal, Kyle whispered. Reeves removed his sunglasses slowly. For once, he appeared every year of his age. We didn't even listen. The station fell into heavy silence. The only sound was the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. That night, Kyle couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sam's serene face through the glass, heard his steady voice saying, "We're in for an extended evening." He knew something had transformed today, something irreversible. He just didn't realize the story wasn't finished. Tomorrow, the real consequences would commence. The following morning, the small town of Millstone buzzed like a disturbed hive. Word had traveled quickly. Initially, it was murmurs in the diner, hurried conversations over coffee refills. Then it spilled onto the sidewalks, into the hardware store, even inside the church foyer. An elderly man arrested, FBI agents storming the police station, SUVs and suited figures. Everyone possessed a version of the story, but none felt complete. None explained why Officer Kyle Morgan awakened with dread in his stomach, or why Sergeant Tom Reeves remained uncharacteristically quiet. All morning, Kyle sat behind the front desk, staring into space. The coffee in his mug grew cold. Every error, every misjudgment from the previous day replayed in his mind like a broken recording. The worst part wasn't the FBI agents. It wasn't even the silent shame in the station. It was the simple fact that Samuel Whitaker hadn't resisted them, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even scowled. He had allowed them to restrain him. A man who had witnessed things Kyle couldn't fathom, and he had shown them more grace than they merited. The station door chimed open and Kyle's head snapped up. Standing in the doorway was a woman, perhaps late 30s, dressed simply in denim and a brown jacket. Her hair was secured in a practical bun. She carried a small, weathered leather portfolio. "May I assist you, ma'am?" Kyle asked, forcing steadiness into his voice. She nodded. "I'm seeking the officers who arrested Samuel Whitaker yesterday." Kyle and Reeves exchanged a quick look. "That would be us," Reeves said cautiously. The woman stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Carter. I work for the Department of Veteran Affairs, Special Services Division." She displayed a slender badge from her jacket, the same department handling high-level classified veteran operations. Kyle felt his mouth go dry. Dr. Carter continued, her eyes meeting Kyle's. "Mr. Whitaker isn't merely a veteran. He's part of a secured federal program for retired covert operatives. His status is protected by national security protocols. What you did yesterday," she paused, selecting her words carefully, "was dangerous, not just for yourselves, but for him." Kyle swallowed hard. "We didn't know." "That's precisely the problem, Officer Morgan," she said quietly. "You didn't even ask." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Dr. Carter placed the leather portfolio on the counter. She opened it slowly, revealing several files, each stamped "Top Secret" in bold red letters. She slid one file forward without opening it. "This is Mr. Whitaker's federal classification. You lack authorization to read it, but you should understand he has received commendations that don't officially exist. He served in missions that, if compromised, would jeopardize national interests." Kyle felt dizzy. Everything they had done yesterday, every careless push, every dismissive word, it hadn't just been wrong, it had been a betrayal. "Why is he here?" Reeves asked finally, his voice rough. Dr. Carter's expression softened slightly. "Because heroes like him don't desire parades. They want peace. They want quiet lives. She took a deep breath before continuing. Whitaker saved lives you'll never know about, prevented conflicts you'll never hear about, and now all he requests is a little dignity. She closed the portfolio carefully. Consider this a professional courtesy. There will be no formal charges filed, no lawsuits, but the federal government will be monitoring this station closely. Kyle nodded numbly. As Dr. Carter turned to leave, she hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. Officer Morgan, she said softly. Yes, ma'am. She gave a small, almost melancholy smile. Not every lesson comes with a second chance. You might want to use this one well. And then she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of old leather and a silence heavier than any reprimand. Kyle sat back down, staring at the file folder he wasn't permitted to open. The weight of it all crashed down on him. Not just the guilt, but the realization that true heroes didn't seek recognition. They simply walked quietly among us. And we barely noticed until it was almost too late. 2 days later, the town of Millston had nearly returned to normal, or at least that's how it appeared on the surface. But Kyle Morgan felt a shift in the atmosphere. It was in the cautious way people glanced at the patrol cars now, in the whispered conversations that ceased the moment he walked by, in the looks of quiet judgment he caught from old veterans sitting outside the diner. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even resentment. It was disappointment. And somehow that cut deeper than rage ever could. Kyle knew he couldn't erase what had happened, but he also knew he couldn't simply pretend it hadn't occurred. So on his next day off, he made a decision. He drove the narrow, winding road out past the edge of town, where the woods thickened and the houses thinned out to nothing but fields and silence. There, tucked beneath a slope of pines, stood a small, weather-beaten cabin, Samuel Whitaker's home. Kyle parked his cruiser a good distance away and walked the last stretch on foot, his boots crunching over gravel and fallen pine needles. As he approached, he spotted Sam sitting on the porch, an old rocking chair creaking beneath him, a weathered book resting in his lap. The old man looked up long before Kyle reached the steps. Not surprised, not wary, just calm. Kyle stopped at the bottom of the porch, hat in hand, feeling every inch the rookie he truly was. Mr. Whitaker, he said, voice low. Sam closed his book gently and set it aside. You're braver than most coming out here, he said almost conversationally. Kyle swallowed. I needed to apologize. In person. Sam's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close. Then come on up, son. No need to shout from the driveway. Kyle climbed the steps slowly, feeling the weight of every footfall. When he reached the porch, he stood awkwardly, not knowing whether to sit or stand. Sam saved him the trouble. He pointed to an old wooden chair across from his own. Have a seat. Kyle sat, hands clasped tightly between his knees. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the soft breeze whispering through the trees and the distant call of a crow overhead. Finally, Kyle broke the silence. I didn't listen, he said. I assumed the worst. I treated you like you hadn't earned any better. Sam studied him quietly. You were doing your job as you understood it, he said simply. It's easy to judge from the outside. Kyle shook his head fiercely. That's not good enough. I should have done better. Another long pause. Sam leaned back slightly in his chair, the old wood groaning. Son, he said, the truth is, I've been judged worse by men who knew more, and forgiven better men than you for worse mistakes. Kyle looked up, surprised. Sam's gaze was steady, but not unkind. I don't hold grudges, he said. Life's too short and, frankly, too precious. Kyle exhaled, the knot in his chest loosening just a little. Still, he said, I need to earn back the trust I lost. Sam gave a soft, almost inaudible chuckle. That's the thing about trust, he said. You can't demand it. You can only live in a way that deserves it. Kyle nodded slowly, feeling those words etch themselves somewhere deep inside him. They sat there for a while longer, talking about nothing and everything. Sam told stories, not about missions or medals, but about fishing trips gone wrong, about stubborn tractors and leaky roofs, about life. Kyle listened, really listened, for the first time in a long while. And as the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long golden shadows across the porch, he realized something simple and powerful. Respect isn't owed by titles or uniforms. It's earned in the way a man carries himself when no one's watching. And Samuel Whitaker, in his quiet strength, his endless patience, carried himself with the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Stories Kyle would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of. When Kyle finally stood to leave, Sam reached out and clasped his shoulder. "Don't beat yourself up forever, son," he said. "Just be better tomorrow than you were yesterday." Kyle nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, sir." Sam gave a small nod in return. "Now go on," he said, waving him off with mock sternness, "before I make you chop firewood to pay off your penance." Kyle laughed, a real, honest laugh, and tipped his hat before heading back down the path. The setting sun bathed the world in gold as he walked away from the cabin, his heart lighter than it had been in days. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start, and sometimes that's enough. 1 week later, something unexpected happened. The morning shift at Millstone Police Station was slow as usual. Kyle Morgan sat at his desk, sorting through paperwork, trying to focus, but his mind kept drifting back to that conversation on Samuel Whitaker's porch. The station door creaked open, the bell above giving its usual tired jingle. Kyle looked up and froze. Standing there was a man in full military dress uniform. Not a casual visitor, not a recruiter, a general. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, medals gleaming quietly against the dark green of his jacket. Behind him stood two other men, both younger, also in uniform, their posture straight, their expressions unreadable. Sergeant Reeves stepped out of his office, his usual swagger gone. He stiffened instinctively, coming to attention. The general scanned the small station with an intensity that made Kyle feel like his soul was being inspected. Finally, the general's eyes found Kyle. He walked forward, every step measured, deliberate. When he reached the front desk, he removed his hat slowly, respectfully. "Officer Morgan," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm Major General Clayton Ross, retired." Kyle rose from his chair so quickly he almost knocked it over. "Sir," he stammered, "how can I help you?" General Ross smiled slightly, a tight, knowing smile. "I believe you already have," he said. Kyle blinked, confused. The general reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. He placed it on the desk between them with a soft thud. Kyle stared at it, unsure. "Open it," Ross said. With trembling fingers, Kyle flipped the box open. Inside was a military challenge coin, but not just any coin. It was engraved with a single phrase, "For lessons learned in silence." Kyle looked up, his throat tightening painfully. General Ross nodded. "Mr. Whitaker asked that this be delivered personally. He said he wanted you to understand something." Kyle swallowed hard, barely trusting his voice. "Understand what, sir?" The general's expression softened. "That mistakes don't define a man," he said, "but how he answers them does." Kyle felt something crack, open inside him. A pressure he hadn't even realized he was carrying. General Ross straightened, slipping his hat back onto his head. "And one more thing," he added, "you're being reassigned." Kyle's heart jumped. "Reassigned, sir?" Ross nodded. "The Department of Veteran Affairs has requested you for a special liaison program, working directly with retired veterans, people like Sam." Kyle's mouth fell open. I don't know what to say." The general gave a rare, full smile. "Then say yes." Kyle stood taller, feeling something steady anchor inside him. "Yes, sir," he said firmly. General Ross gave a sharp nod and turned to leave. At the door, he paused, glancing back. "And Officer Morgan," he he said. Sir, welcome to the side of history no one talks about, but that matters most. With that, the general and his escorts disappeared into the sunlight. Outside, the station was silent for a long moment. Finally, Sergeant Reeves let out a low whistle. Kid, he said, clapping Kyle on the back, you just stepped into something bigger than this whole town. Kyle smiled quietly, tucking the coin into his breast pocket. He didn't need a parade. He didn't need headlines. He just needed to be better tomorrow than he was yesterday. Because somewhere out there, men like Samuel Whitaker still walked among them, silent, unseen, carrying the weight of countless sacrifices. And now Kyle would spend the rest of his career honoring them, one quiet act at a time. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was right. Because some debts could never be repaid, only carried forward with humility and heart. And sometimes the greatest tribute you could offer a hero was simply to listen. In our darkest moments, compassion still finds a path, often in the quietest corners. Not everyone who serves desires recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes that alone is enough to transform a life. You may forget the story, but if no one shares it, history remains silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.